The exact procedures for using load testers in testing specific makes and models of cars varies, but general procedures are similar for all testers and automobiles. Each type of load tester has its own advantages. Always refer to the specific directions that match the operating procedures for a specific tester. Settings are provided for testing the battery, starter, and alternator. Since the load tester must be capable of consuming tremendous amounts of electrical energy, a cooling fan is often used to prevent the carbon pile from overheating. The main control is the load knob that allows the tester to draw hundreds of amps of test current. Rotating the load knob clockwise increases current draw. Load testers have an adjustable timer for limiting the battery load test to 15 to 30 seconds. To avoid sparks and a possible battery explosion, never turn the tester on until after making your connections. A Start Test button is used on some load testers to trigger the preset 15 to 30 second load test. A diode checking switch is sometimes provided for a more comprehensive reading of the internal functions of the alternator. A reset button may also be provided. Large alligator-type clamps are used to connect the tester to the car battery. Modern load testers use an inductive-type amp meter pickup. It is simply clipped around the cable to read amps. As this animation shows, current flow through a circuit wire will induce current into the tester lead. There isn't a need to disconnect wires to measure amperage. When connecting the load leads to a battery, make sure you get a good connection. Wiggle the leads to cut into virgin metal on the battery terminals. This will help assure accurate test results. Always make a good visual inspection of the battery and other parts before testing. Look for these kinds of problems: dirty battery top, cracked case, loose cables, a bad hold-down clamp, or other problems. A coating of grime on top of a battery can reduce battery life. The acid-dirt mixture will conduct electricity across the top of the battery, as this voltmeter shows. As a result, the battery can be cycled repeatedly when the car is shut off, and then have to be recharged every time the engine is started. Loose, corroded battery cables are another common problem. Often, car owners won't bother to service a battery until their car fails to start. Always check for loose cables or broken or loose posts before testing a battery. A voltmeter or a load tester can be used to check for a poor connection at the battery cables. Measure the voltage drop across the post and cable. If your reading is over 0.5 volts, clean the connections. Remove the cables, then wash the battery top off. Use a battery cleaning tool to remove the oxidized layer of metal from both the posts and the cable ends. It is impossible to test a battery that has dirty, corroded battery connections. White grease will help protect the connection from future corrosion from acid gases. Tighten down the cables and make sure they are secure. Also, service side terminals if needed. During your inspection, also check for an alternator belt that's loose or glazed. Either condition could prevent normal battery charging and cause starting problems. Your first test should be battery state of charge. Connect your load tester to measure battery voltage. If below 12.4 volts, the battery is drained and will have to be recharged before further testing. You cannot load test a drained battery. Charge the battery if needed so that you can do an accurate load test. With top posts, and especially with side post batteries, make sure you get a good connection with the battery charger. If required, install special post adapters or bolts. This will let you charge or test the battery. After charging, load the battery to 1/2 its cold cranking rating for 5 seconds to remove any surface charge on the plates. Then recheck state of charge. If still below 12.4 volts, the battery is probably bad. Remember the danger of a battery explosion. Severe injury or even death can result if sparks ignite battery gases. Next, connect the amp pickup to the positive battery cable. Check the cold cranking rating of the battery. You need this value to find out how much load to apply to the battery. Simply divide the cold cranking rating by 2 to get the testing load. Turn the load knob until the amp meter reads the calculated load for the battery. Adjust the load to 1/2 the cold cranking amps, or 3 times amp-hour rating for your battery. Press the start button so that your battery is only loaded for 15 seconds. While the 15-second load is applied, note the voltmeter reading and compare it to specs. The voltmeter should not drop below the voltages shown in this chart or a chart on the tester. As battery temperature drops, the output of the battery will also drop. If the test voltage drops too low during the load test, replace the battery. The load test is the most accurate method of checking battery condition. The carbon pile in the tester draws a tremendous amount of current to precisely measure battery power capabilities. As this animation demonstrates, you are simulating worst-case conditions of power output from the battery. To test the starting system, follow the specific directions for the exact type of load tester and make of vehicle. Crank the engine and note the amount of current drawn out of the battery. Current draw must be within specified limits for engine size and type of starting motor. The load tester accurately measures the amount of amps drawn into the car's starting system. The inductive pickup senses the amount of current flow out of the battery and into the starting motor. It typically takes over 100 amps to start an engine. Any problem in the starting system can prevent normal engine cranking. Typical current draw should not exceed 125 to 175 amps for small engines, 150 to 200 amps for medium-size engines, and 175 to 250 amps for larger engines. Always refer to factory specs. Various problems can prevent normal starting system operation. A bad solenoid can reduce current flow or keep the motor from being energized. Worn brushes and bushings or shorted windings can increase current draw. Remember, high current draw is caused by something lowering circuit resistance. Low current draw is caused by high resistance in the starting circuit. Pinpoint tests might be needed to verify the exact source of the problem. To test the charging system, again, follow the specific instructions provided with the tester and in the service manual. Generally, set the tester controls for an alternator test. Look up the alternator amp rating in a shop manual. Specs can vary considerably. Curb idle may not be high enough to accurately measure alternator output. You can place the amp meter clip around the cable leading from the alternator or around the battery cable. When connected to the battery, make sure that you surround all the wires going to the battery. Load the charging system to maximum output without letting the voltage drop below 12 volts. Compare your amperage output with specs for the particular alternator. If output is low, the alternator probably has internal problems. In summary, first, measure battery voltage to determine state of charge. Then, start and run the engine. Voltage should increase to about 13 to 14.5 volts. Load to spec amps and compare to specifications. Other more specialized tests can also be done with a load tester. A voltage regulator test basically checks output with no load on the system. Measure battery state of charge first. Charge the battery if below 12.4 volts. Load test the battery after charging it. Load the battery to half its cold cranking rating or 3 times its amp-hour rating. If voltage drops below its specs for the battery temperature, replace the battery. If the voltage stays above its spec value when the load is applied, the battery has sufficient amp output to stay in service. Remember that temperature affects battery amp specifications. To check alternator output, refer to the instructions provided with the tester and with the car's service manual. Start and fast idle the engine. Load the circuit. Then note maximum amperage output, but don't let voltage drop below 12 volts during the test. If output is low, the alternator probably has internal problems. Remember, if used properly, the load tester can be a valuable tool, a tool that will speed diagnosis of electrical problems and make you a better technician.